Discover the Women in Tech Trailblazers podcast, hosted by Tiffany, Benitez, and Jordan Franklin. Here, the complexities of being a woman in the tech industry are unraveled through discussions on key issues, personal growth, and how to succeed despite systematic challenges. It's a source of empowerment and inspiration for all women at all stages of their tech careers. Welcome to Women in Tech Trailblazers. I'm super excited to have him here with us today. Mark Macioce. Mark currently serves as Vice President and Chief Information Officer for Masco Corporation. What is Masco? It's a global company that designs, manufactures, and distributes home improvement and building products. He has over 24 years of experience in technology, so we're going to get the real deal today. Engineering, quality, continuous improvement within the industrial manufacturing, consumer goods, and media industries. He serves on the board of Civista Bank, as well as Ohio Guidestone, has a bachelor's in management of information systems from Pennsylvania State, master's in computer science and engineering from Gannon University. He counts General Electric, Scripps Network, Alaris, Pentair, and Omniva. Did I say that right?
No, correct.
Okay, as previous employers. I will tell you, I am extremely excited to have Mark here today. Mark is actually one of my personal CIO mentors. We were matched through a program that I went through, but it has been the most amazing blessing. And I'm not just saying that because he's sitting here. I'm saying that because when there are male allies that are really willing to stand up, and not just for one person or not just to check a box for DEI&B, that really says that I'm passionate about making space for women. I am passionate about making space for all underserved populations. That goes beyond words. So I have got to benefit for almost the last year from his mentorship. So I am excited to have him here today. And we are actually going to be talking about a topic that, if you know anything about Jordan and I, the next generation, we are extremely passionate about. It's not just focusing on us and what we want to do here, but that how what we're doing here really funnels into that next generation. So we'll be talking about next generation leaders.
Yay. And welcome. We're so excited to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I always like to kick off our podcast with, the first of all, we identified like a word of the year, and it was authenticity. So we always like to ask, what does authenticity mean to you?
Absolutely. So thank you both. Honored joining you both. And I have to tell anybody listening in, Tiffany brings this level of energy to all discussions. I love it. So authenticity, it is simplicity form for me. It's just, it's the real deal. Be your real self, be your real person, the person you are, whether you're on a podcast or the person you are having those, 9:00 meetings with your daughter over things that happened at school that day. They should be pretty transparent, and it's the same face. To me, that's being authentic.
Yep. Keeping the same personality through all conversations. No fakeness. I agree with that. I think that's a great way to explain it.
Being able to show up and bring your whole self. We just kind of had some conversations around that, but super important. Okay. So I do want to talk about, I know I talked about your bio. I know you've done some really amazing things, but as we talk about our next generational leaders, talk to us a bit about your personal journey, like with, really focusing on your career area and how through that you've really helped redefine what a next generational leader looks like.
Absolutely. So from a background experience side, pretty diverse background. It's been both technology and non-technology functions. Had a lot of different roles through companies you mentioned, like General Electric on the industrial side and Scripps from a media side before joining Masco Corporation. But I think learning to be adaptable, keeping that continual kind of mindset to learning a bunch of different business models and functions, that was one part of it. But I would tell you one of the things that was really a cornerstone, having leaders, particularly in my GE early years, who took a lot of chances on you, stretched you beyond just the role you were currently at in that moment. That's absolutely the backbone, I think, to where I'm at today and where I'd argue where I'll probably go in the future. So one of the things I'll put a lot of faith in is I joke my GE stories probably start to grow old and some of my employees, but they're really time tested. You learn so much about tech, business, and leadership during your time. Had leaders, both great male leaders, great female leaders. So as I reflect back, I think the one attribute they all had was just, take chances, take risks, and really, really stretch you. From a next generational leadership perspective, my style, pretty much like yours, Tiffany, although you might got me beat a little bit, is I love high energy, high engagement, collaborative, continuous improvement. And I always say challenge the status quo. If we're looking at the next younger generation of leaders coming up, my experiences with them have tended to be, they're a lot bolder and candid than probably myself and others. They're seeking really authentic servant style input in leaders, and they expect their leaders to be receptive to getting feedback just like you're giving them. So I think it's all about recognizing, I think the titles don't equate to entitlement. We work for one another and need to treat the relationship as such.
Yeah, no, I love what you said too about the new generation. I think they bring a completely new view to what we're doing or what we're trying to do in anything, right? You bring them a problem, they're going to solve it. I feel like they solve it completely differently than I would even go about it. And I think that's so special to like harness and pull out.
Yeah, I think another thing is that to both of your points is that that's very different than maybe what we've seen to this point. And what we are doing as companies and corporations and businesses today may not work for that next generation. And so we're really going to need to like open our mindsets to say, what will it take to retain? We talk about retention with companies a lot, right? Like, how do we attract the best talent and how do we retain the best talent? And that's going to have to change a little bit in the manner with which we do it, right? They're not going to settle. Like, this next generation will go get a van and they will live in their van. So they are not strapped to a company that they feel like they can never leave because they've got to pay this mortgage, right? They're coming up with creative solutions. They know their value and worth. Like, hi, it took me 40 years to get there, but they know their value and worth and they're not willing to settle for less. And so while I know there are some conversations of entitlement and things like that that also happen while we have conversations about this next generation, I think that we have some valuable lessons that we can learn from them. And we are also going to need to reevaluate. They are what's coming, right? We will be done and gone soon. And so how do we make sure that we are understanding what their needs are and that we're able to provide in a business perspective what it is that they need to be able to flourish so the companies can continue to flourish.
Well, and I think one of the things that you said there, Tiffany, was how do you attract and retain the right talent? Because they're going to be attracted and retained in completely different ways than we've seen in the past. We all, not to say that LinkedIn isn't great, but it can also be a black hole and they're not willing to sit there and wait for it, you know? So how do you do that more efficiently? I mean, I know how I think it would work. Seeing how that's the industry that I sit in. But I think that's a very, very, very good point that they're going to be attracted completely differently than others. Yeah.
Just to comment on that too. I mean, to your point, that cross interview, you're always interviewing for the role. And, you know, when the questions come back across the table, we're starting to see it's not always about that role, right? It's what do you do in the community? What do you do from a development standpoint? It's interesting to see that there's a greater sense of it's not just interviewing for the role. They're interviewing for that sense of the company's place in the community. They take sustainability in general. I mean, that's one piece of it, but they want to see a bigger picture and they absolutely want to see a bigger purpose for sure.
Yeah. And I think that like coming from the recruiting world, at least from my side of things, I think that cross interviewing is something that we used to have to coach a whole lot more than we do now, right? Like now it's almost innate. Like we'll sit in interviews with clients and everything, and the people will just naturally start asking questions back. And the interviewers like expect it. They almost like expect it so much that if they don't do it, they're almost like off. They're like, did this person even like think for themselves? And so I really think that's a good thing because you're interviewing the candidate just as much as the candidate is interviewing you and your team, or else it's just not going to work. But I definitely think that's a huge thing. It's my soapbox. I'll get on it some other time, maybe not here. Okay. So just some kind of questions like about your career and things like that. I would say like, what kind of challenges have you encountered and how did you overcome them? And how can we like help the next generation see their full, potential and opportunities and those kind of things?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a number of them. I'll highlight two, I guess, that come to mind, and actually tie back to the women in leadership theme. There's conversations on gender bias and discrimination, workplace culture, work-life balance, educational barriers. The educational one, you see a lot of focus in K-12 and STEM. There's two other areas I think are keys: leadership and representation. The stats that we get as leaders in the company still show that even though there's a push on the educational barriers and the STEM and cultural, those numbers still are not adding up. We see them. So I think from that side it's still women are definitely underrepresented in leadership roles. And that's also going to limit their ability to influence and the availability, I think, for younger role models. The other one that comes to question, I think it's male and female driven, but a lot, from conversations, Tiffany, you and I have had, is that imposter syndrome feeling. Whether you're in that leadership role or aspiring to be there, there's definitely a feeling as not being as capable as peers, despite you see these qualifications and you see people acting. So is it really that there's a non-qualification? It's not. And female engineers coming in, traditional engineering paths, IT paths, credentials, qualifications, it's all there. I think as leaders, you have to create that environment where leadership ensures that you're seeing actionable things that allow people not to feel that. They're not quiet. You draw that out. And then women can be highlighted for experiences beyond just, okay, they fit that role and that duty and qualification. They need a platform and they need to feel like they don't have to be quiet about it. So I've seen that happen. I've seen it, a good example. Past life where I think you can deflate that and actually encourage even more imposter syndrome. You can have somebody with a great idea pitching it and have somebody, a counterpart, pitch the same thing or re-paraphrase it, and you completely deflate someone who had just gave a great idea. And I think it's like a pet peeve of mine. I'm like, I think what she said is exactly what you just paraphrased. And that's a pet peeve.
We call that, so you can laugh at this, Mark, we call that heap-eating. So he repeated exactly what she said, but what I heard you just say that you do is key, right? That you notice it and then you kind of just say in the most respectful way possible. I think that's exactly what so-and-so just said, right? Kind of bringing attention to it. Because the other thing that I think we fail to call out a lot is that I don't think it's typically that there's like malicious intent, right? I think that there's just a lot of bias, that unconscious bias that we're not even always completely aware of. And things have been done the same way for so long or repeated in that same way. So I don't think that people even have bad intentions. But when you take the opportunity and kind of say, yeah, I think that is what she just said, what you do is you allow for a little bit of awareness of like, oh, I just caught myself doing that. I probably shouldn't do that because that's not what my intent was. And it also gives that woman that's sitting there that said that like a power, because typically we just kind of just shrink away or we're just so used to it. We just keep going. And I always say that like the most diverse tables are the most powerful tables. And if I'm being real, we are all in business to make money, right? Like all companies are trying to make money. And so if you knew that diversity was the way to do that, and this next generation also has diversity figured out in a way that we haven't, it's almost more natural to them. I think if for us, it's very check the box, even people that are super passionate, like we know how to do it, but we're still trying to figure out our companies to do it really well. And so when I talk about those diverse tables and that our next generation are really good at diversity, how do we take some of that diversity and their ability to do that much better, translate that into some key leadership traits? We are in an era of rapid technological innovation. And so what traits does this next generation from a leadership perspective really need to have, factoring in diversity with that as well, to make sure that these companies are building the strongest tables?
Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, so, in general, I think if you're getting back to adaptability, EI, communication, visionary thinking, I think those are not, I wouldn't call them table stakes, but I would say to get at that previous comment and how we're helping to encourage, collaboration, getting people to understand that your proactive engagement, getting outside of your current role, encouraging collaboration, and I think trying to make all members feel valued, doesn't matter female or not. I think there's a sense, especially in the tech community, you get so enamored in what you're currently working on, find ways to engage, especially in a remote environment. That's even 20-fold, right? But I think the collaboration, the proactive engagement, don't assume, reach out, share your ideas, share what you're working on. And then I think another one that often gets overlooked is trust. So you want leadership to look down on different roles and maybe understand what you do, but the peer-to-peer. So leaders have to create and foster that environment that can shine the light, if you will. But I think there's often side of the peer-to-peer side, there needs to be some trust and empowerment there as well. It's not all the leader's job. They have to create the environment, but I think peers do a huge job of helping to promote one another, and they should. You see that with rewards and recognition, when you see companies that want to say, hey, how can I give somebody a nice, kind of pat on the back? I think that's the peer-to-peer power that starts to come. If the peers are doing it, I do think leaders see that. And in some cases, they tend to want to emulate that themselves. So that would be my two. I think stretch really hard for active collaboration and engagement and start to work on trust and empowerment at all levels.
Yeah, no, I think you hit on things. It comes from the top, but it is grown and fostered amongst your peers, right? Like, I know that X, Y, and Z manager is really trusting of me. They want to hear my ideas, blah, 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 blah. Well, that's where you start. But if your peers poo-poo on everything you say, then you're not going to feel empowered to say anything. Doesn't matter how much that manager tries, right? So you really got to make sure that all of those peers are on board too. And I think, I mean, with emerging leaders like that, like, how do you ensure, like, from a manager perspective, how do you ensure you're cultivating peers, that are having those conversations? How do you make sure that they understand, it's not acceptable to act like that, or it is acceptable and that's how I want you to act? Like, I want you to be engaging and uplifting. And if you have some criticisms, we want to hear them, but we want to hear them in I don't know how you do criticisms in a good light, but you do criticisms in a good light, right? Like, you communicate them effectively. How about that? How have you in your past or in your career really helped to cultivate that environment?
Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors, Women in Technology of Northwest Arkansas and Gumption at my-gumption.com for their support. Their contributions are critical in bringing these meaningful conversations to you. Stick around for more engaging discussions right after this break.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that mentorship and development, it's almost like the peer-to-peer recognition. Tiffany, you talk about being a mentor, but also being a mentee. I think when you start looking at building that, I think that colleague support and sharing, that's a mentorship development mindset that says you don't have to always look for formal mentorship. If peer-to-peers are doing that, that helps a lot. I think when you have a bigger sense of what you're working on, it's not just, the department, it's not the project, it's not even the company's mission. I think when people can start tying things back, not all of us get to work for St. Jude's. And I always use that as my example. That's a feels good. I'd love to do what I do in my current role, but if you could ever have that opportunity to do it where a company like a St. Jude's, it's a feels too. If you're not working for a company like that, how do you create that sense that there's still community and involvement? I think if everybody had a little sense of where they had to give back, I use the word pay it forward a lot. It's not always pay it forward from a mentor side. There's that lateral and cross peer-to-peer type of pay it forward. When you have that, and that's, I come into work, I do my job, I get my projects and I get my goals done, great. If you can create that sense of collaborative and community, I think things start to flush out easier. And to your point of how can you have a conversation where, or as a leader or peer can interject and say, I think she said that, right? I don't think in cultures where you're building that effectively, that's even a thought. Somebody just say, oh, great, like she just said, and it's skipped over. In cultures where it's not as authentic, the person saying it and coming in at that defense, I think often it's, everyone gets real quiet, right? And the room gets real quiet. Culture plays a huge part of this. And I think as leaders and as organizations, you got to step back and ask, what is the culture we're trying to build? I think a lot of places, I've seen, and from my experience, you think you have a really great culture until you start pressure testing it with things like that. And then you see how far and how fast a culture can fall apart. So we're all in it together. Leaders, to your point, have to have a really good thing to pull people along, set the right example. But I think you want that shared sense of that the peer community can help to drive that as well.
Yep.
Culture is key, and culture is the people, right? So a company can foster a culture, or they can write a mission statement or put some values on a piece of paper or website, but it's the people that foster the culture. And I will tell you, people do not leave bad jobs, okay? They leave, that sounds silly, but people leave because of poor toxic culture and leadership. Yep. And so it is absolutely, I actually said this in a recent town hall that I spoke at. It is also I think both of you said this, but it is not just leadership, meaning titles, responsibility to create a culture and to foster positivity in that culture. That is every single person that works there's responsibility. It is each of our responsibility to say, I want to be part of a culture that looks like this. And then you have to do something. Saying it is great, but you've got to actually put some action behind that. Otherwise, it just becomes a bunch of words. And again, you have to start asking yourself some serious questions. When you've got a lot of attrition, you have a hard time attracting good talent, like you've got to start asking yourself some questions on like, what do we need to work on here? And weaving all of us, right? Again, it's not just the leadership. It's not just the executive leadership team. It's like, what do we need to work on? I know, Mark, you touched on mentoring, and I personally have gotten to live out your passion around mentoring, but I also am super passionate about mentorship, especially with regards to the next generation. If there's not someone that's already been there or that is there to help you walk through the journey of getting there, and it's not giving you a recipe, right? All of our journey is different, but it is saying like, hey, I've walked this journey and here's some things that have worked for me. Maybe you could try things like that. So talk to me about what you think the power of mentorship and sponsorship too, two different things, but I think that they are both super powerful to anyone's next steps, but definitely like talk to our next generation. Like if you were going to talk to them about what mentorship means and how much it matters, what would you tell them?
Yeah, great question. Great topic to reflect on. I mean, right out of the gate, I'll tell you personally, it's providing, I think, guidance and support. And never think that you don't need the mentorship. They'd say, I mean, the role I used to always hear is the higher up you move in your career, it gets lonelier at the top as you go because you have less and less people that probably, it's not that they don't want to see you be successful, but it changes that level. So peer evaluation, CIO peer, for myself, peer-to-peer is good. It provides me emotional support. It encourages some positive behaviors for difficult situations. And to be honest, whether you're an individual contributor or you're running a whole department, there's a level of confidence and self-esteem. You're still, if you're not second guessing yourself as a leader, it's not a sign of weakness. You should always have that level of, am I doing the right thing? Having somebody to bounce that off of, it's just good confidant, right? The other piece is, whether you're a leader or not, I think there's a lot of stigmas that come with being in leadership roles. I think being able to start talking about things like it's hot topics last couple of years after the pandemic, mental health and well-being, those peer evaluations, which were set up to help you with management scenarios and leadership scenarios and helping develop people, right, have turned into, hey, this isn't related to work, but I'm dealing with this thing here. That wasn't really commonplace before. It's like you would really shut the door on some of that personal piece and you were all business, I guess you'd say. I've noticed even a lot of those peer-to-peer mentoring have opened up doors that are a lot more personal and get into areas that I think is definitely needed. Corporations are starting to see that, but I think there's stigmatisms that get addressed in there as well. So I'm a huge fan of mentorship up and down. So whether you're a mentor or mentee, I think if you're mentoring someone, it says a lot if you're actually going through and you're a mentee for somebody because you learn both ways when you're doing it. And Tiffany, in our situation, we talk and yeah, it's a mentoring, but it's like, man, that's a good point. I'm going to take that down. I learn things from the engagement as well. So I think when you get a really good mentoring assignment, it doesn't become one way, it's really two way. And sometimes that sneaks up and that's the win-win in this situation. So, but yeah, huge fan of it. And I think that support network's needed for sure.
Yeah. And I will say, like you said, when it goes both ways, it's like the holy grail of mentorship, right? But it's also that that mentee came prepared for those meetings because that's when you get more out of it. When the mentee is like, hey, I need a meeting with you because of X, Y, and Z, and here's the reasons why, you're like, sometimes I don't have my stuff together to even do that, right? And I'm like, whoa, okay, well, when do you want to meet? Because now I'll make time for you because now I know you need it. Like you have a reason to be here and I want to be there to listen to you and help. I mean, I've had mentees that are just so put together that when I'm the mentee, I'm like, I just want to be like X person, right? But I think that's one thing that when people go into the mentor-mentee situation, the mentee just thinks, oh, they're providing something to me, but you're also providing something back to your mentor and coming prepared to ask questions or to provide anything back to them is a big part of that too, I personally think.
I absolutely agree. And I tell you, I've seen mentoring programs, formal, informal. When everybody used to always say, well, don't come just at somebody with their problems. I'm going to counter that. I think if you have situations, scenarios, you see a lot in business today where it's like experiential learning. To bring something to the table, it's like, I just got this really difficult thing I'm dealing with. Bring that to a mentor because it's like live, like just like shadowing right there versus let me bring out my career chart or talk about a project where it's over structured. It's like, I'd rather get into some of that dirt and things you're challenged with. I think those are the best scenarios, honestly.
Yeah, agreed. So what would some community support groups or networks be that you would suggest that, our next generation gets involved with, or even our current listeners? I'm sure we have some next generation people too, hopefully, but our listening group too.
I'll give a plug out for a few of them. I mean, one I'm in, which is a CIO peer evaluation or forum for myself, peer-to-peer group, is Inspire Leadership Network. While they focus on CIOs and CISOs in the world, they also have a believe it or not, next generation leadership academy. As we are looking at the curriculum, it's pretty awesome, nationally known program. And not only does it tailor to those type of roles, but they actually have an offshoot around women in leadership. It's beautiful. CIOs across the whole nation, just almost every state represented. It's a really good network peer-to-peer. And then I do love the fact that they have that women in leadership kind of focus. Another national one you both are probably aware of is Get With It. I know we had one in Cleveland. It's a fabulous organization in Cleveland. I met a lot of folks connected to that organization. Did not realize it was national. Just thought it was something local here, but women in technology, it's a great one. So getwithit.org. And then for my Masco side, I got involved with Michigan's MCWT, Michigan Council for Women in Technology. The reason I bring these up is these forums exist at a national, global, regional. If you have a chamber of commerce, oftentimes the chamber has one. They're not hard to find, but I would say feel them out, see what works for you, and even locally and regionally, if you're not finding something, look national. And I'm sure, especially now with technology, if you have to get plugged into one that's in a region outside your region, they're going to open you with welcome arms. So those are three that I actively help and I'm engaged with, and just have a lot of respect for what they do.
I love it. Okay, so we're coming up on the end of our show. Sad face, that's always the worst time. But we are super grateful to have had you here today. And if you had to leave our audience and listeners with one piece of advice, like there's probably a million you have, but one piece of advice, and again, knowing audience is next generation as well as our current women and allies in technology or have goals to come into technology, what piece of advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think the number one thing from a leader and non-leadership aspect is, and if you want to make a sustainable impact on community as a whole, pay it forward. These mentorship opportunities are what you make of them. And if you can pull yourself out of the day-to-day and take all those experiences you've gained, I think if you take all those experiences and you don't share those with others, all those trips you took around the sun, I think were completely wasted. It's not even about the current company you're with or your current role. I think there's a greater sense of community. If you can take those experiences and pay them forward through mentorship, you'll have a bigger impact than you think. So do it. Get out there today.
I absolutely agree. And I have to make a plug for one more organization for you to look at, especially since of where you are located. There's an organization called E for All, it's entrepreneurship for all, right? And they help small businesses and small organizations get started. And so it's a huge mentorship program, right? So they place like 3 mentors with a new entrepreneur, and there's ways to pay it forward there too, because at least y'all in IT, it might be easy for you, but it's not for everyone. So those kind of things, you can always pay it forward there too. I think that's a great note to end on, is paying it forward, especially with the holidays. So
awesome.
Yes. And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. I know we're in the middle of this holiday season. We hope that you take some time and really rest, relax, enjoy your family. We are super excited to come back for another season. We have some amazing people lined up for you. So continue to listen in. And Jordan,
subscribe, follow, whatever you want to do, but share us and make sure that everyone can hear our voices too.
Yes, and you will, at the end of this episode, as usual, you will see Mark's LinkedIn information come up across the screen. Go out and follow him. He is doing some amazing things. And if you didn't hear all of the organizations that he was plugged in and supports, listen, none of us have time. You make time for what matters. And I heard at least 3 to 4 women in tech groups that he's supporting on a national level. So thank you so much for being here, Mark, and to our audience for being here. And we will see you soon.
Well, that's a wrap. Another episode of Women in Tech Trailblazers podcast. Thanks for tuning in and sharing this time with us. If you liked what you heard, please share this episode with your friends in tech. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. Your support helps us keep bringing in inspiring guests and uncovering topics that matter to you. Until next time, keep pushing boundaries and making your mark in the tech world. Goodbye for now.